But the bilateral stimulation is important because the more sedentary we are, the more this stuff just sits in our bodies, right? The more active we are, the more we move, the more it works itself out organically. So Da Vinci or Socrates or any of these people, they're receiving from something. So that actually was probably the key piece from that book that was helpful for me, because that's what creativity is. Like, it's a synergy with God. Highly sensitive people, their central nervous system is made differently. So they're sensitive on a broad spectrum level, or maybe like a wide aperture lens on a camera.
If you had to choose between a mullet and a perm, which would you choose and why? Matt, tell us a little bit about you. What's your story?
Born and raised here in Lincoln, Nebraska. First handful of years are pretty sketchy. Like, short story is, grew up in a broken home. Mom had severe mental illness. Father was an ex-convict who reformed, and they broke apart pretty early on. Had a lot of trauma and a lot of different experiences like that in my early formative years. Grew up with my dad, and by the time I was 12, I was already into addictive behaviors and things like that, and lived that for a number of years, and then eventually hit the jumping off point. I kind of got brought to the precipice of alive or dead is where I was at. You know, am I going to take care of things, or what's going to happen here? And so at that point, I ended up having an encounter with God that shifted things for me. He became very real to me. He showed himself to me, revealed himself to me very clearly. And that moment was a pivotal turn in my life that brought me in this direction. And so everything didn't get fixed, that's for sure. It's still working towards that end. But my life started to move in the right direction. I started to have a lot of transformation, a lot of change, and eventually called to serve God in my work vocationally. And now I'm married, 4 kids, and yeah.
So were you raised with a faith background at all?
Very little. My mom was, she went to Assemblies of God parish or church in Bellevue, Nebraska. And so when I was 10, I got baptized there. She told the story. The pastor did an altar call, and she looked down, and I was running up to get baptized. I remember getting baptized because I was terrified. I'd almost drowned when I was little. And so they had us in a big old tub and dunking you know, to baptize you. So I remember that. But I had that, and then for about a year, I had an active faith life. Like, I experienced God in that time. And then some things happened with my mom that were very difficult, and my whole family situation kind of blew up, and that went away at that point. So I had about a year there where I had an active relationship with God. And then after that, nothing. So my dad was pagan, 100% pagan, didn't believe in God, didn't have anything like that happening in his life. And that's where I was growing up. So outside of my mom's involvement for that period of time, it was not much. And then I will say after that, she was really Jesus crispy. So she'd like shove Jesus down my sister and I's throat, and we'd get pissed at her every time she did. So anytime I'd have a problem or get in trouble or whatever, Jesus this, Jesus that. So I developed a pretty active resistance to that eventually led me into atheism and some of those things in my young adult years.
Was that Jesus crispy, which is a great term, by the way, was that, do you feel like she had a relationship with God, or was that more just like a third party? Like,
no, she had a very vibrant relationship with God.
Really?
Yes. To this day, I don't know that I know anybody who had the kind of relationship with God that she did. Wow. God was very real to her, and his hand was all over her life. I've learned about grace through my mom and her relationship with God. Like, she just made every possible poor decision you could. And he never left her. He was there, right? And a very active part of her life.
You know, talking about your mom and dad, like with your dad being full-blown pagan, like what was their relationship like when you grew up? I mean, would they, how did she even, so what drew her to him versus, I mean, if she had this.
So she told me So she worked in an office building downtown. My dad was a reporter for the Journal-Star. And my dad called her on the phone and asked her out on a date. She thought he was somebody else, said okay. He showed up, and she was the kind of person that wasn't going to be like, oops, sorry, I thought you were someone else. We're not going to do this. And so she went on the date and then ended up getting knocked up. And my sister came about. They got married, it's the late 60s, early 70s, and went that route. But I don't think there was a lot there. But my mom was severely mentally ill. She was schizoaffective, which is schizophrenia and bipolar both. Like very severe mental illness. So that kind of stuff was emerging as well around the same time. So that had a lot to do with things falling apart there.
Do you still, is your dad still in your life at all? Or
No, both my parents are deceased. Okay. My dad passed in 98, April 19th of 98. So coming up here's the anniversary. Yeah. And then my mom was October of 2019.
Okay. So, not to jump too far ahead, but you're a very spiritual person, and you do discernment with people and talk about God and what He's maybe trying to help them hear what God's voice is. Have you ever had, like with your dad passing, potentially not, was he baptized?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea. So my grandmother, his mom, adoptive mom, she was a faithful Methodist as long as I've known. One of my aunts is a Methodist pastor who's been married to two different Methodist pastors. Kind of weird.
Knows what she likes.
On the other side, I've got Methodist pastors and chaplains, so they're all over both sides of the family there.
I just wondered if you had any mystical experiences or anything with maybe your dad's asking for prayers or anything like that.
So things ended real poorly with my dad. And there was one time at Mass. So 2 points that I had with my dad. One of them was at Mass at St. John's. I was there. And like I said, things ended negatively. So there was a lot of pain. And I remember having this image as I prayed with my dad during Mass. And it was like a tumor going tunk, like kind of separating from me. That was one. And then a few years after that, I had was in spiritual direction. And the anniversary was coming up. And my director at the time said, when you go to a Mass, this is the place where everything's reconciled. So when you go to Mass, you should ask ask a priest to offer Mass for your dad, and then go to that Mass and let this stuff emerge there and see what happens. And we happened to be at the CK Sisters giving a retreat that weekend, and Father offered the Mass. And as I opened that up, I had a profound experience of a type of reconciliation there with my dad. So didn't take care of everything, but it was very much moved me in the direction of a lot more peace around me.
Praise God.
Yeah.
So with all the Methodist influence in your background, how did you end up at Roman Catholicism? What was that journey?
That was Jesus all the way. Catholics are the whipping boy for people who don't like obedience, rebelliousness, that kind of thing, So like when I went to a 12-step program, anytime there was a third step topic, half the people at least would say they were recovering Catholics, instead of talking about the God topic. But the way it emerged was my wife was cradle Catholic. And when we got together, I was going to Berean, and she wasn't really doing anything. But about this time, she had a relationship with God, but Jesus was kind of out there still. And she was starting to come back to faith around that time. And she didn't want to go to Berean. She had been there before. It felt weird. She didn't like it.
And Berean's a Protestant. I can't remember what.
Yeah, Bereans are evangelical mega church over here.
Okay.
And so I was going there. She didn't want to go there. And she went back to confession around that time and started going to Mass. And once we realized things were maybe actually going somewhere, I was basically like, if we're going to go any further, you're going to have to stop being Catholic and come with me. Like, it's just not going to work, And she was like, no, I'm good. It's like, what? No, that's not how this works, right? Like, not that I consciously picked women I can manipulate, but historically speaking, I was with women who would do what I said and what I wanted, and she wouldn't. And just wouldn't, and had no good reason not to.
Yeah.
Couldn't defend her faith, nothing like that, but she just wouldn't budge. And so I was an asshole and left and thought about it a few days, realized Jesus certainly wouldn't act like I did. So I went back and apologized, and in talking to her, I was like, I really don't know anything about Catholicism at all. Like, nothing. And so I ended up going to St. John's. She said, well, make an appointment with Father Johnson and talk to him. And I did, and that was the beginning of movement in that direction. I had an experience at St. John's walking into the school where they treated me normal. Like, which... tattoos and all of that. I don't always have that experience in church, but they treated me like they would anybody else. And then Father Johnson just joked with me and things like that. It opened me up to, this or something different here. And that kind of was the doorway.
So would you validate them? I've heard other people that maybe have same-sex attraction, things like that, that
Sure.
they feel like the Catholic Church would judge them, like they're staying away because they know that the Catholic Church is not welcoming. But I've never seen that, and I've never experienced that, and so I just wonder, with your story, that would sort of validate that they were very welcoming to somebody that maybe had your background and the way that you looked at the time.
Well, this particular experience I had was welcoming. That's
Okay.
definitely not the total picture by
Okay.
any stretch. I've had plenty of experiences in the Catholic Church that were unwelcoming,
Okay.
where it's clear I'm not wanted there, I'm not accepted, oil and water type thing. I've had a lot of those experiences too. When I look back at it, it's very clear to me that God shaped those experiences so that I could become Catholic. And it took time before I had the other experiences. And I think for me that was necessary because I just wouldn't have became Catholic. Not a chance. But once I was already Catholic and had the experience of the sacramental life and this vibrant relationship with God within the church, then having those experiences is a very different thing.
Wow.
So if we fast forward, so that's kind of your rough backstory, and fast forward to today, modern day, what you do for work. What do you do, and how did you get into that?
So I meet with people one-on-one. I give spiritual direction, although I would caveat that a little bit. Like, the understanding of spiritual direction currently in the church is helping people with their prayer lives, helping them connect with God and discern. That's an aspect of what I do. But what I do is much more holistic. I probably, like, if I really got pointed about it, I help people uncover who they actually are and shape that, how God wants it, and facilitate that process. Sometimes I'm the hand shaping, sometimes I'm just helping them discover. There's a whole different ways that occurs, but I'm shaping identity in people, authentic identity. So a lot of that means helping them to even uncover who they actually are and what they actually think, feel, desire, believe, perceive, all of those things. But then also the other side of it, like, God wants to speak to all of us. He's very real. And so there's different ways that I help people receive that as well.
So in order to do that, I would imagine that had to start with the self journey of self-knowledge, figuring out who you are, what your identity is, how you relate to God. And I think you were the first person to introduce the topic of highly sensitive people to me, HSPs. And I imagine in your journey, that's where you found yourself identifying with that. How would you define HSP, and how do you see, how has that played a role in your journey? Not only from self-identification and realization, but also in the work that you do with people.
Yeah, so highly sensitive people, HSPs are highly sensitive people. And so this is a part of how the person's made, how they're created, sensitive. And so Dr. Elaine Aron says about 15 to 20% of the population is highly sensitive. And so highly sensitive people are made differently. They're like a open nerve, right? Would be a good way to put it. So like if you have that in your mouth, you drink some cold that's like sensitive or hot. Highly sensitive people, their central nervous system is made differently. So they're sensitive on a broad spectrum level, or maybe like a wide aperture lens on a camera, right? Versus down or wide open. Highly sensitive are greater degrees of openness like that. So that means this person perceives more. So an empath is a real thing, but an empath is somebody who's sensitive very narrowly on the affective empathy area. A highly sensitive person is going to be much broader than that. So like highly sensitive people are highly empathic because that's a part of it, but there's usually other things involved. So my best friend are noise canceling headphones. Because auditory stimuli is really exhausting for me. It can really compromise me. I love music too, and I drink music in very deeply because of the sensitivity. So somebody may drink it in a little bit, and I drink it in like that, and it really just absorbs deeply. So sound, I wear seamless socks because the seams drive me up the wall. Pants, I have probably 7 pairs of the same pant in 3 or 4 sizes as my fat level adjusts. They're the same cut, the same fit, because I found one that actually works. I can't just wear anything. All of that are things that have to do with high sensitivity.
Yeah, I think
foods.
The first time I heard highly sensitive, it made me feel, as a man, it made me think that meant effeminate or just not masculine. But like to your point, the way I understood after reading the book on it was like having a bigger radar.
Yep.
You know, if you're picking up a radio frequency or a signal coming in, instead of having this big, it's this wide. So you're just catching more.
Yep.
And that helped me to not feel so uncomfortable with it and to kind of embrace that aspect of who I am.
Yeah, so as a man, this is important because a lot of us look at that as weakness. But it's actually a greater bandwidth and capacity. Which means that I also, if that sensitivity is filled with love, I'm going to have a greater strength, stability, right? And impact. Like that's the side of it we don't think about. You know, when it's empty and there's not love filling it or meeting that sensitivity, it's absolutely a cataclysmic weakness, right? People can manipulate, put the screws to you, anything can capsize you. But the minute that's imbued with light, it's a whole different reality. So like the whole thing about a highly sensitive person, if we take the image of holiness and what it means, it's to be infused with divine life. That's what it is. That's what baptism does, confirmation. Every time we commune is we're being infused with light. We're plunging into it and it's coming into us. And so a highly sensitive person is highly absorbent. They perceive that more and at a deeper level, which means relationality tends to flow a lot easier for highly sensitive people. They're more attuned to relationality. They can read people and things around here. Highly sensitive people tend to get more traumatized easily because they're more sensitive. Things land more deeply and hurt more.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So when you first started talking about HSPs, I wondered, is that something that's a result from being traumatized as a child or something where you see through a different lens, kind of moving forward, you know what I mean? Or is it something that you were that's how you were wired initially before anything? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, so a highly sensitive person is wired that way. It's their nature.
That's just how they were born. Okay.
Now, trauma will be compounded because the person's more sensitive.
Okay.
So if your normal person perceives pain, 1 to 10, right? And most people operate in a 1 to 5. I'm going to operate in the 1 to 10 range. Okay. I have a daughter who's classically highly sensitive. Right, so if I snap at one of the other kids, it'll land like whatever, right? They may or may not react to it. If I snap at this one, I'm getting a full-blown reaction every time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So if you think about it, a situation that's traumatizing for somebody, essentially this natural way we are, enables that to land much worse and be more complicated. But it's not a fruit of trauma, right? But highly sensitive people perceive things differently. They perceive between the lines and all these kinds of things. Right?
So it's really a gift.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely a gift.
Well, yeah.
If it's filled with love and light.
Okay.
If it's not, it can really be difficult.
That's the question I had was how do you, when someone first hears what highly sensitive, and hopefully people can research what it is and start to learn about it. But I think when you first recognize that in yourself, you can see it as a curse because I can't shut this large radar off. It's just, it's pulling everything in. I think I used the example with a friend recently, like if you had, everybody has a magnet and I have a small magnet, but then another guy's got a magnet that's the size of his body. Like you got to be careful what you walk past. And to your point with having headphones, like there's times you need to, you're just more aware of those sensitivities. So how does somebody that's learning about being an HSP see that as the blessing instead of the curse aspect of it?
Well, it's if we're rooted in who we are, it's all about boundaries, right? Boundaries are the defining markers of something, right? So this table, the boundary is the edge there, and it defines its rectangle. It's all these things, right? So it's all about our identity. And so like in my own journey of healing as an HSP, it's been self-knowledge has been key to that, coming to understand who I am and how I am at a very intimate level. And that knowledge helps me to be very clear on what is not me. And when I'm clear on that, I don't receive it. I don't get confused. So I can be around somebody and they're all distressed and I'll feel it, like very palpably feel it. But when I'm clear that that's them, then it stays out there. I don't take it. I don't absorb it. It just stays out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's something that I'm speculating, you've had to work on defining that.
For years.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondering, like, people hearing that and saying, like, oh, that's not how it is for me. Like, I don't think that's how it is for most people. It's a discovery process.
Yeah, it really requires getting to know you and being in your own body, in your own soul, getting the stuff you've absorbed out and cleaning that out because like touches like. So Jesus says, right, that Satan's coming for him towards the end of his life there in Matthew. He says, but he finds nothing in me. There's no landing pad of darkness for Satan to get a foothold in him. So the issue with a highly sensitive person is, am I filled with light or dark? Is what it boils down to. If I've got landing pads of dark, then that dark outside of me is going to find a place to connect and land. And that's what we experience that's, right, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And so as we heal and become more defined in who we are and those places shrink, the more all that stuff just kind of stays out there. And it doesn't require a lot of effort.
So it's not that doesn't still affect you, but the more, it's like with any muscle, the more that you sense that and learn that, like you said, when you can sense that in someone else, you can now say, that's not me. I can feel it, but it's not me. And then you can put that boundary to not absorb their emotion or their distress or whatever it is.
Yeah, but even beyond that, like that's like the foothills. But even beyond, so like I was given a parish mission last week, and this individual came up to me and about 10 times in 15 seconds told me how inappropriate my talk was the first night.
Gosh.
Right?
Thank you for your feedback.
And it didn't even land. Like it didn't touch me. I didn't feel anything when she was saying that. That's where ideally we get to. These things don't even land anymore because we're so in who we are and our identity and that light and that love that it just can't end anymore. And that's where Jesus lived, which is why he was unmovable. Like he just couldn't be shaken like that. Right?
Yeah, that's neat. So to me, that even that topic of HSP is an extension of where you started from, which is it's all about identity.
100%. Because it's a part of my identity of who I am. It's part of the unique way that God made me. And so when that's filled with light, all those sensitivities, like it can lead to hypervigilance. reading between the lines, calculating everything people do, and oh my God, what does that mean? And oh my God, Mike looked at me weird. Maybe Sizzle does mean he likes me, or I don't know. Like you get in these weird spaces, right?
Yeah.
That's when your sensitivity is being worked on. It's not integrated. But in my case, like as it pertains to say my work or something, that sensitivity with God's grace gives me a perception of reality that is very different. And it can be at the service of God and other people because I can see little nuances like that.
Yeah.
I can perceive God differently than your average person can. They may only perceive this much and I perceive that much. So these little nuances of that all become clear, or the nuance of the person's soul. When somebody says something, like who they really are emerges. I don't know any way to explain it exactly, but I see it, right? It's not like I see something visual, but I see it, I perceive it there, and that I can draw out, right? And then God can be there. Or I hear God or see something with that, and I can draw that out, right? And the two can connect. But it's all integrally tied to that sensitivity.
So that's why it's really important to have like a spiritual director, like somebody that can help kind of guide you through, because if you continue to focus on yourself and all these, you're hypersensitive, all these things, not having somebody that can kind of look at it from an outside perspective, that gets really dangerous. Like, because then you're constantly like reassessing and evaluating everything, but to have somebody that's grounded in the faith and everything that can kind of say, okay, I can help you navigate this and understand what you're dealing with. And that's what you do now. I mean, one of the questions I had for you was, how long have you been doing, strictly spiritual direction? And the reason I ask is because I know with, that's not a job you find on Indeed or something like that, right? Like this is something where you're relying on God's providence big time, in order for him to bring people to you that you're getting enough money to pay for your family and for the things you need. So how do you continue to stay in that area of, I'm going to do God's will and I'm going to rely on his providence? How do you do that?
Well, I've been meeting with people one-on-one for 25 years in various capacities. Strictly spiritual direction. What are we in? 2025? Probably since 2013, 2012, 2013, right in there is when it really flipped over to spiritual direction. But I don't limit it to that. Once again, what I do is much more holistic and broad spectrum. That's a component of it. And it all comes from spiritual fatherhood or spiritual motherhood. Like, we're so fragmented now in how we do things. We've got therapists, coaches, spiritual direction, mentors. I mean, hell, mental health, you can flit out into about 7 or 8 different specialties, right? They all come from the same thing, which is being able to be one-on-one with somebody and help them uncover and discover who they are. It's not complicated. You see it in every religion. You see it all throughout history, from shamans to priests to mediums to therapists and all these different things. And so that's what I'm participating in, is this whole way of work and of life. And so I got into it. It's a natural gifting of mine. As far as getting called into spiritual direction proper, that was just something that unfolded. I mean, I'm a tattoo artist, right? My neck's covered. Back in the day, these were job stoppers. Like, I intentionally got them. Like, this is my path forward. This is where I'm going. Not so much today, but back then it was. And I never intended to do this. And it's not really the call of the laity. The call of the laity is to have a job, a normal job. That's our call. And there's this whole thing in the church today about the age of the laity. And my opinion on that would be that's false. That would be what Pope Francis is talking about with the clericalization of the laity, which is unhealthy and not good. Clerics are clerics, and they're meant to be clerics. We, as lay people, are meant to participate in the work of God to the degree that we're able to with our giftedness in the place we find ourselves, which for 99% of us is in our life, car lot, right? Leather work, doctor, mechanic, like whatever those things are. So for me, it was tattooing. And the situation was as such. I mean, you're like a bartender when you're a tattoo artist, except for a lot longer period of time and people aren't wasted. So you're sitting there for hours on end and they're telling you everything you tell a bartender when you're opening your beer, you know? And so formation occurred in that environment and then eventually God plucked me out of that to just very specifically do this. But that was a very organic process. But for me, it required a leap of faith because there is no job description. I have a contract with the university, and when we were trying to navigate the contract and the fees, like any good nonprofit, they go do some research to find out what's the wage or what's the price for this kind of thing. And it was really disheartening because all you could find online was anywhere from $10 or free on the low end, and the high end was like $50. Well, you can't make a living off, $50 an hour. It just isn't gonna. Definitely not with a family and things like that. So that whole process has been interesting, but the whole thing has been God-led, which is really the point. In our life, the question is what is Jesus doing? What would Jesus do? What is he doing? What's he doing here? Everybody told me, one of my best friends is a priest. And he's like, Matt, we all have jobs. Nobody just gives spiritual direction. Right? Like, we all have jobs. You probably have to get a job. But for me, I was like, no, I don't think that's true. I think God's calling me to this. I had one piece of evidence, one individual who just recently passed away, who just gave spiritual direction. She was an 80-year-old widow who was consecrated widow, right? Like, so she was done retired. Husband was a doctor. Like, she's fine. She's not in my position. But it boiled down to, do I believe this is what God's inviting me to, and do I take steps into that? And as I did, things unfolded from people coming to me to income and how that's worked. So it boils down to that. Is like, everything here boils down to Jesus. Am I listening to him? Am I perceiving him? As an HSP, I can perceive him a lot clearer, right? And I can step into everything he wants. That's the profound gift of being an HSP, quite frankly. There's a cost to it. I have to put up with epic amounts of bad energy. And I'm not talking about people I meet with. I'm just the world. Bad energy, bad mojo, people's emotions, people's crap. Like, it just lands roughly. But the high point of that is to be able to perceive God and then to step into that and follow that. It's been nothing but a grace-filled experience, right? If I continue to allow him to enter in more deeply.
So I didn't want to pick on the low-hanging fruit, but clearly you brought it up first. You got a lot of tattoos. So how long did you have your tattoo parlor for?
Oh, I had it for a decade.
Okay.
My own for a decade.
Yeah. Okay. And so that was an outlet for creativity for you. And I know you and I've talked coffees about creativity. We read a book that I think, Mike, you read too. I think it was called Big Magic. Is that it? Yeah. And it was just eye-opening. I think it was a secular perspective. I don't think she had any faith background per se. It's been a few years since I read it. But what role does creativity play in your life? Like, that's a huge part of your life for 10 years to be a tattoo artist. And it seems like it was a conduit to conversation with other people. So it was also an outlet. But what role does creativity play in your life and in your work?
Well, the short answer is I was meeting with this dude, and we were talking one day, and it was after COVID emerged. So, everything's fracturing and polarization's happening, and we were like this. And to his credit, he's like, we don't agree. How about we have coffee and talk about it instead of just, demonizing and all that kind of stuff.
Novel idea.
Mm-hmm. And we sat down and talked. And at the end of the conversation, he was like, you're still tattooing, Matt. You're just tattooing hearts now. Mm. And when he said that, it hit. Like, I was shaping and molding images before, drawing them out, creating them, putting them on people's skin, etching them into skin. Now I shape and mold the image of God into people's hearts. Right? So the same creativity's there. Like, I would sit down at a light table to create an image for somebody and have no idea what I was going to do. I may have some reference material or something that I'm pulling from, but even with the reference material, like, whatever comes, and I really generally had no idea what that was going to be. And it would emerge, it would unfold as you're drawing, right? It's no different in what I do for work. Like, I go in having no clue what I'm going to talk about that day, what's going to happen. I have no plan. I have no pattern of doing things. It's a 100% creative act, right? Just listening. And like in Big Magic, she talks about the ancient Greek notion that everybody had a demon or a daemon. I'm not sure how it was pronounced, but it was Daemon, which the idea is that a genius is somebody who's receiving and making manifest. It was a spiritual activity. It wasn't, oh, this person's special and gifted and they're just unique in creating this. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So Da Vinci or Socrates or any of these people, they're receiving from somewhere. So that actually was probably the key piece from that book that was helpful for me, because that's what creativity is. Like, it's a synergy with God. And what's inspiring me to do this?
Yeah, that's Mike and I were talking.
God, it could be something else.
A couple of days ago, that like we are created by a creator in his image and likeness. So we have creativity naturally just within us that wants to come out. And Mike actually sent me a link to a video on, I think it was Prime or somewhere, about some Nashville songwriters, and they kind of talked about that same thing, that everybody wants to say they have this method or whatever it is, but when you get to these like songs that you hear on the radio all the time, the people that are writing those, they just say, this stuff just comes to me.
It just dropped into me.
I'm just sitting there, but if I'm open and receptive to it, I can receive it and then put it out.
Take Tom Petty's Wildflowers, that song Wildflowers, right? Mm-hmm. It's what you hear there is exactly what he did that day. It literally dropped into him. He played it. He hit record. He played it. That's that.
Huh. That's awesome.
He tried to re-record it, and it just went nowhere. So he basically he tweaked it a little bit, but like used the original recording.
I think in that book too, she talks about having a story that she had been working on for a long time, and then she meets this other woman, and they have coffee, and then you realize that this woman starts talking about a story that she's writing. Yep. Well, that just ends up being identical almost to her story that she had already written that nobody knew about. And so it's like, if you look at it from, like you said earlier, like, we don't know, is it coming from the Holy Spirit or is it coming from somewhere else? But if there is a point at which maybe if you don't act on it, that's going to bounce to somebody else, or somebody else may run with that. And it's an interesting
Jesus
idea.
says that he's sowing seed everywhere all the time. Seed, what the seed is it's that. It's the inspiration coming. The question is it going tink? Is it finding a place? Is it, oh, that's cool, kind of get started, peter out, chuck it? Does it actually find a place to plant and it comes out of you? Right? But I absolutely believe that's happening from both sides. God has a plan, Satan has a plan, and all their peeps do. And so the seed is constantly being sown. Some of us receive it and run and reproduce it. Some don't.
Yeah, Mike and I, we talk a lot about the coffee group that we have on Fridays. And just when we meet with those guys and we talk, like, it's a super interesting group, because there's a bunch of entrepreneurs, but there's also doctors in there and guys who work for other companies, IT guys. But like, we all have this creativity, but are we open to it? Are we receptive to it? And do we share it? That seems to be the natural cycle or process. But to your point, for those of us that aren't attuned to it or ready for it or open to it or scared to embrace it, it does just tink, and it's gonna bounce off. I think when we're open to it, and I don't want to say this way, but it's like God sees there's fresh soil there. I'm going to throw more seed there. It feels like that's what happens. That's where the good fruit comes from a tree, that it keeps bearing more fruit because it's open and receptive to it.
Yeah, Warren Buffett's a creative. That's why he does what he does. Yeah. If you listen to him, I remember reading a biography about him in my early 20s. Like, he doesn't care about the money. Yeah. It's a game to him. It's fun.
Well, I think one of the quotes from him is that he said, if you do something you love, you'll never work another day in your life. I think that's very true. Most people struggle with that because they get sucked into the mundane and the security of a paycheck or whatever the situation is, and they don't step back to be open and receptive to what is out there for me. How can I create and share that with the world? I mean, that's what entrepreneurs do at their core. They create something from nothing and share it with the world. And that creates value, and the value is reimbursed in our country with dollars.
You got to be willing to take the hits too. Like it's a scary to go out on your own and do your own thing, but it's so rewarding too. The fruit is so good. So yeah.
Well, when we're creative, like we're putting something of ourselves into that, and then that's why it's scary. Like how secure am I in who I am because I'm putting myself out there?
Bingo.
Do I value myself? Like we've had many conversations about this around money.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm always inspired by you. You can make money come out of nothing. Just it's right there.
Great value,
right? Not my experience personally, but what it boils down to is that identity. That's like, do I value who I am and what I'm doing? So like this whole Alaska adventure that might potentially be going on, I had a number for a salary I was going to ask, and I was on the phone and I upped it 15 grand as it's like the split second it came out of my mouth. Right. And I'm listening to myself, and it was a moment of God. It was a creative moment. It was God inspiring me, and I yielded to it. It was no different than if I was in spiritual direction and something came to me and I said it and it like opened up.
I like the way you said that too. You yielded to it because you could have let your fear,
100%.
Inhibition, whatever it is, stand in front of that and not let that flow through. And that would have been on you. But you were open and receptive to it. You just let it flow through.
Yep. And what's cool is they said, okay, along with some other stuff, a scholarship to the school and these other things, which we since said no on the scholarship to the school. But what happened in that was like this moment, this inspiration came. I wasn't particularly like experiencing a lot of fear or anything, or even temptation. It was just a seed that was there, and I went with it, right? And it compounded, it bore huge fruit, because then they came back and said yes to all these things. And then that seeped in. It's like, oh, wow, you are valuable. They see. They're actually going to pay you what you're worth. So that has since come into question. You know, some of the details have shifted. And so the whole thing might not come about. But one of the profound graces of that has been like the thought of asking for that wage. I don't even bat an eye thinking about it now. 2 months ago, I would have been like, I wouldn't even want to utter it to one of you.
Who do I think I am to ask you that?
Right. But that's the whole thing. Like if I receive and respond to those inspirations, like the fruit it reaps in us is just amazing.
But you've gotten there. I mean, I think for a lot of people that might be watching, I think that's such a comforting place to be, where you can just rely that actually God is speaking to me and I'm cooperating with him. But to get there, you've got to do a lot of like judging the fruit of it, right? Like you've gone through, we've talked about it before, like after you feel inspired to do something, you go back and sort of reevaluate, journal about it. What was the fruit of this? And if it was good, you can kind of honing in on how he's speaking to you. Would that be accurate?
For me, it's much more intuitive than that. Like it's a moment like that. Like this thing came, I said it, and I look back and I'm like, there it was. Like that is moving me further down this line to a greater place of peace and freedom.
Okay.
One of the things I have to be attentive to in my own life is hypervigilance. As a person who's had a massive amount of trauma in my life, that's one of the temptations, and it's a fruit of anxiety. Hyper discernment, really looking a lot, checking, vigilance. Vigilance is a fruit of trauma. Right? Take a monk, you know, one of the desert fathers or mothers. They're not in a place of vigilance. They're in a place of placid, and they can see. So when I'm actually resting in my identity and who I am, it's this spacious place where I can just see. Like there's the shepherd's voice. That's clearly not. Right? When I'm in a place of vigilance, it's usually because there's unrest and agitation and discord happening in me. I'm afraid, and I've got to make the right move, and I got to make sure, and right? And it's a fruit of that pain and trauma and desolation.
Would you be able to go into, like we've done some spiritual direction with you too, and you go into this feeling prayer? Would you want to go into that a little bit to kind of explain that to people? I think it's been really fruitful for me.
Sure. Well, it's not complicated. It's just... So the human person is a body that is animated by a soul. The soul is the animus of the body. If you've ever seen a deceased person, you see an inanimate human body. Right? The soul is the thing that makes it animate. It's the thing that is different about a live person versus a deceased body there. And so that's what the human person is, a soul and a body. Our soul is our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, right? And when I say thoughts, what I don't mean is every little errant thought. I mean, what is the thing that's taking up my thought life at present? So Alaska is taking up a chunk of my thought life. Here in Nebraska is taking up a chunk of it. The good of my children, like there's all kinds of things, but it's what's captivating my thought life currently, right? So thoughts, your feelings. When I say feelings, I actually don't mean emotions. What I mean is all of the intuitions, inspirations, and things that are feelings outside of emotions. And then desires, what is it that I want? What is it I'm longing for? Positive or negative, doesn't really matter. So that'd be the soul. And then the body would be my physiological sensations and my emotions. And I would put emotions there because they have a physiological response. So like anxiety has a physical posture. It's this. Right? That's what anxiety is. It's scared, huddled over. And our body has a lot to do with shaping of our soul. The two interface. They're interdependent. One of the reasons people have so much anxiety is because they do this all the time. Like their body and their movements and what they're doing, not to mention the content they're absorbing, is actually disposing them to anxiety. Right? So, bodily sensations and emotions. When I'm having an experience, like if we think about what happens at the Mass, at the very base of what's happening at the Mass, the most foundational thing, his Father is taking bread and wine, and he's going like this, and he's saying, God, please change this. Transform it. That's all he's doing. Everything else is at the service of that happening. And so when it comes to prayer, there's what's happening in my body and in my soul. And if I hold it open to the Lord and I ask him to change it, what that means is I need to actually be in my lived experience, whatever that is. That's ultimately what feeling prayer boils down to. So if I'm anxious, am I actually feeling the anxiety and saying, Jesus, I need you to transform this. I need you to speak into this. I need you to speak to me. And just being present in that reality. If I'm at a place of peace and comfort and joy and those things, am I actually experiencing it? Right? Or am I removing myself from these things? That's a big part of people's problem. Right? So ultimately what feeling prayer boils down to is that. It's, do I abide in my body and my soul and my lived experience and invite Jesus to encounter me there? Sometimes that can be a very distasteful, painful, volatile situation. Sometimes it can be absolutely blissful and amazing.
Yeah, so I do, my spiritual director does feeling prayer with me. And I remember the first couple of times I went there, like it was a good experience. And a friend of mine goes to him for spiritual direction too. And I said, how's it going? And he said, well, you do this feeling prayer. And I just sit there. I was like, isn't it great? And he's like, no, nothing happens. I was like, oh, I'm going to keep working on that with him. But there was like a disconnect between his body and his feelings. But once you can put those two things together, there's some pretty amazing results. I mean, I've had some, I don't even know what you call those, like otherworldly, very existential, mystical experiences that I literally had to document it afterwards. I said, that's not natural or normal what happened, but it was beautiful. And then my last spiritual direction, a lot of times, so we'll take the word desolation, we'll take these desolations in our lives and we'll do a feeling prayer on those because they have to do with fear or anger or resentment, whatever it is. But I went in and I said, well, here's what happened to me since we last met. And he said, well, that sounds pretty great. Let's do a feeling prayer on that. And I said, oh, that's interesting. He said, don't call it this. So I'm going to get in trouble for saying it. But I think he said the technical term for it, he uses the dissolution prayer or something like that. But he said, I call it the Oreo cookie prayer. Because it's like undoing the Oreo cookie. You just lick the good stuff out of the middle and chuck the rest. And so that's what we did. Is we did the feeling prayer on that consolation, and it was pretty magnificent. Just focusing on that feeling in the prayer of consolation and recognizing that was a gift from God, no different than the desolation was a gift from God. So we focused on that in our prayer, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's more important to do that with consolation than desolation even. It's the consolation that actually heals and pushes out. It's like an image sometimes I'll get is, say you had a glass, and it's caked with mud and crap on the inside. If you take a butter knife or a screwdriver and try to chip that out, you're going to fracture the glass. It's going to go crazy, right? But if you take that glass and you stick it under running water, like at first it's going to hit and it's just going to look like water with a muddy bottom. But as it softens, it's going to get cloudier and cloudier and cloudier until it all starts filtering out. And then you may be left with some chunks or rocks or stuff that can't just filter out. But that image is really what the spiritual life ultimately is. If we hold ourselves under where grace is at and moving, desolation is that water hitting and it coming up. And so sometimes that starts to happen and we're like, put the cup away. Right? Or pull it out from the water. And so what Father's doing there is actually holding us under the water very consciously.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And maybe even getting one of them rocks out in the process. Something that won't just filter out.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's what he did. He said, he asked if I was feeling any desolations that hit up against it. And I said, I did, but they're kind of bouncing off. And he said, that's because of the healing that you've done. It's a foundation you've laid. So you're able to fill even more with this consolation. It was a really unique experience.
But that's really where you want to stay, is right there. So even when there's no desolation or anything, it's like part of the problem that happens when we're healing is people get hyper-focused on healing. And I see this as a side effect of doing that feeling prayer is sometimes they think this is only about the desolation. It's like, oh no, like anymore for me, any bit of consolation, I don't differentiate anymore between physiological, psychological, or any of it. I don't really care. I have a lived experience that is positive or negative. The positive one, I drink in. Full awareness, full attentiveness to it. So the other day I got a chocolate cone dipped in chocolate. I loved it. It was good. I gave my full awareness.
And then you had to go to your other pants, right?
Right. Or a warm day. Or the sun this morning I noticed very clearly the sun was up. Right? When I was getting up, it's coming through the windows. Like I took a little bit and focused on that because it's been cloudy, a little more cloudy lately.
Yeah.
Right? So I really drank that in. Right? Or a spiritual consolation. I'm really drinking that in the minute it happens. But that's the thing. Like, whatever captivates our gaze is really going to be our lived experience. And love, 1 Corinthians 13, he says, love is patient, love is kind, and love rejoices in the truth, not in iniquity. So think cup half full. The gaze of love sees what's true, good, and beautiful over and above what's sinful and dysfunctional. So how do we attune ourselves to that? By constantly setting our gaze on what's true and beautiful, not to the repression of the other. That's unhealthy. When it comes, we let it come and we stay put there. And that's really what the feeling prayer of desolation ultimately is. Ideally, I'm set on what's true, good, and beautiful and love here. And as I'm gazing upon that, this darkness emerges. And so I don't shift or move or distract myself. I just stay put. And let the demons go and the bullshit and everything else. And then come back to the place of rest and grace. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And even when Ignatius says, if you're in a time of desolation or consolation, prepare for the coming desolation. Because we all know that's going to happen. What that does not mean is setting down a 5-point plan of what I'm going to do when shit falls apart. The best preparation is just to marinate in the consolation. Just to soak there, absorb it. Drink it in. Kind of like in the winter, like I wear multiple layers all the time. Like I'm wearing thermals right now and I get cold easy. But like this morning, I was hot inside. And then when I went outside, it took me a little while to feel chilled because I was so warm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Same thing. If we soak in the consolation, when the dark comes or it falls flat or even desolation, it's going to take a lot longer for that to kind of fall away, if you will. It'll sustain us. So that's really the best prep.
You're like Father Jacques Philippe. Like you continue to drop bomb after bomb after bomb. Like, I mean, it's so hard to soak it all in and digest it because it's just like, whoa, that is just so deep and penetrating. And one thing I know with spiritual direction and the feeling prayer is it can be a very fast process. Like as far as when you do, like you can be at a stoplight and take a moment and soak it in and have that healing happen. So it's not like you have to set aside an hour's worth of time. Like you can do this in your office. Like if you've got 10 minutes where you want to just, or something happens and you just are noticing it, and then you get better and better and better at it. So it's been really powerful for me anyway.
That's important because healing doesn't happen in the office. Healing happens in your car, in your living room. Like I had a profound experience of healing on Halloween last year. My son erupted. I was overly rough with him in dealing with it, his behavior, and it triggered something in me. And I had the split-second decision. It's Halloween. We're going to go trick-or-treating. My wife can get a little feisty about that shit if we're going to put it off. She wants to be on it, like bees on a bonnet. I'm like, well, do I take a minute to go deal with this, or do I just gut it and get on with the night and maybe deal with it later or whatever? And I couldn't decide, and finally I'm like, I'm just going to do it. I don't want to feel like this the rest of the night. So I went to the basement, took 20 minutes. And as I sat there, like I had a profound shift. It unlocked some things that happened to me with my own father. And I got to see how I was impersonating my dad with my son. And that pain emerged there, and it ended it. I haven't impersonated him since like that. And I had 20 minutes of heaving tears as the pain emerged, as I grieved the reality of what I endured and experienced with him. Right? But that was a split decision right there. I mean, it was an experience we've all had as fathers that we deal with as we're raising our kids.
Yeah.
But that's where healing really happens. It's in these little moments.
It takes a lot. So it takes a lot of self-knowledge and courage. I think, especially for men in our country, in our time right now, in this culture, it's easy to skip past that and just say, screw it, I want to do the thing, whatever. For instance, last night, my daughter, she was struggling with some anxiety, and she said, I don't really know where it's coming from, what it's doing. And I had dropped some hints a few weeks ago. I said, we can do a feeling prayer on that if you want. And she asked about what it is. And so last night, when she couldn't identify it, she said, Dad, could we do the feeling prayer tonight? I said, sure. And so I sat down, I did the feeling prayer with her, and I kind of had to walk her through how to pay attention to her body and what she's feeling and where. And then afterward, I said, well, don't forget to go to your Heavenly Mother, to go to Mary. And so she said, oh, I'm actually supposed to pray a decade of the Rosary for something with CCD. And so she said, do you want to pray a decade of the Rosary with me? And it was super late, and I was exhausted. And I'm like, these are the moments. I mean, my 11-year-old daughter just said, Dad, will you pray a decade of the Rosary? And I could have gone to bed and got those extra 10 minutes of sleep, but instead I said, yeah, that sounds great. Because I knew it was the right thing to do. So I did the feeling prayer with her. I prayed a decade of the Rosary with her. And what that does, when I hear your story about you and your relationship with your mom and with your dad, and I think this is my time to rise up and have courage and do the right thing and give her a template and a lens for what faith and spirituality is like moving forward. That she had a dad that showed up when she needed him to and helped her work through some of those things. So it's something that you can do at a stoplight. It's something I've been encouraged by my spiritual director to do with other people. Like, don't just stop short with a friend at coffee. It's saying like, man, I really encourage you to work on that or open that up. Offer to pray with them. Like he said, maybe that's part of mission for you, is starting to pray with people and not being uncomfortable with it. I know you do it for a living, so that's maybe more in your wheelhouse. And for me, it was more of like, are you sure I have to do that? But then once I started offering that, like, people say yes. Guys they're not saying no when I say, would you like to pray? I think people are just ripe. The fields are ripe right now for that.
Yeah, the simplest way we can deal with that with somebody does not take training. It's, what are you experiencing right now? They tell you, okay, just feel that for a minute and ask Jesus, what do you have to say about this? That's simple.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no magic
and
to it.
And then don't judge it, Steve.
Yeah.
Just tell me what he says.
Yep.
Don't judge it. Just tell me what he says. And then usually that's enough. Jesus said something to me. or experience something, right? It's really not complicated at all. That's the whole point, is leading somebody to encounter the Lord. You know, given what I do, there's this Nigerian missionary who I've known for years. And when we were in Focus, he'd be like, Matt, shh, no talking, just pray, right? And he'd try to get me to shut up and just let the person encounter the Lord. Like what you're talking about there, that's the best thing you can do. There's a lot of times that's all I do. Don't even say anything anymore, just what's Jesus saying to you right there about that.
Yeah.
You know? Sometimes getting somebody to do that is the work, right? Or the disconnect. You know, in my opinion, the biggest obstacle Americans are experiencing currently is we have been taught ad nauseum to override our experience, to override it, to the point where a lot of people don't even know what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
They're not even having a conscious experience anymore. Like, it's bad. Take the military, that's essentially what they do. They deaden your ability to experience. And then it serves a purpose. You know, if you're in combat, you're not all tweaked out and weirded out. You're overriding your body and your soul, and you're right there, and you can respond and do your thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't lead to healthy relationality in any sense whatsoever. Right? So a lot of times that's the biggest obstacle people are dealing with. Or the other extreme is they feel so much, and it's so overwhelming and volatile that they don't feel safe going there. Those would be your empaths a lot of times, right? Like a lot of times they're just really dramatic and all over the place. I don't mean that in a critical way, just there's a lot happening in them, you know, so you get them to pause and sit still with that.
Yeah. Would that be where, like, I would imagine HSPs, highly sensitive people, are very creative because they can see the world in different ways maybe, and they want to create, do art. And is that, would you say that's a healing, as you're creating art, that's really a healing process, working through that?
Yeah, if it's authentic creativity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
100%.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It can be a way to process through things. It can be a way to put your soul forward, and there's a million things that can happen with creativity. I
remember when we had talked one time with leatherwork, I remember asking, a couple hundred years ago, why did people not really have the trauma and issues that they have today, that we know of anyway? And you mentioned, well, they worked with their hands. And so that's always stuck with me as I do leatherwork, and I'm constantly using my hands and doing things, pounding, whatever. It is a way of like working through things, and it's been helpful.
So a key part of healing trauma is bilateral stimulation. This is a key part of what EMDR is, or even brain spotting for that matter. These different modalities, they're really about bilateral stimulation. That happens with movement, right? So you can tap, that's the method I've learned, or eye movement. And there is something different and unique about the eyes. That's a whole different topic. But the bilateral stimulation is important because the more sedentary we are, the more this stuff just sits in our bodies, right? The more active we are, the more we move, the more it works itself out organically. So you can be stressed out and you go for a walk and you feel better. Like, part of that's because it's bilateral stimulation. It's walking. And the other part of it is your body's flushing all kinds of stuff. Energy, emotions, cortisol, adrenaline. Like, it's all getting flushed out there. So the more sedentary we become, and then not only that, our eyeballs, right, which there's 12 cranial nerves, 4 of them are in your eyeballs, right? So 12 predominant nerves that come off your brainstem, 4 of them in your eyes, they're ocular. So we don't move, and then our eyeballs are absorbed with all kinds of stuff. And then we're not even dealing with the quality of the stuff and what that is, right? That's a recipe for your body and your soul just going ape all over the place, right? So yeah, moving, doing stuff. I mean, think about it. You're out jacking trees and doing these other things. Like, you're getting this crap out of your body. I mean, you don't have headphones. So what are you doing? Thinking about what that bleepity bleep just said to me in the house. You know what I mean? Working through it.
I don't remember the last time I chopped down a tree, but I feel like I should go do it now. So
whatever it is, like that's what they're doing. They're all doing these more labor intensive jobs and all this stuff, but they're working it out. They're not distracted by stuff. So you actually have to think about things and move through them. And divorce wasn't a thing until the last 75 years, So you're stuck with this chick forever. Like, you're working it out. You know what I mean? Or you're killing each other. Something. So life was just very different, than it was. But a big part of that's physical activity. I think.
Sure. Okay.
So as we wrap up, because I know you've got to go, Matt, it's been a huge blessing having you here, and I appreciate you being willing to come on and talk and share. So we can put in the comments or wherever, resources for people to find information about HSP and whatnot. As far as like spiritual direction, figuring out identity, especially for Catholic men out there, like where would you point people as a starting point for onboarding with that? Like if a guy's saying like, I feel empty, I'm not connected or vulnerable or intimate with other guys, my marriage sucks, et cetera, like where do you tell a guy, hey, start with this?
The first thing that comes to mind is I would first contact your pastor, talk to him, and I would find, are there any IPF trained priests in your area? Institute for Priestly Formation. It's a type of formation that priests can go through and seminarians go through that disposes these men to not only be deeply prayerful, but deeply integrated on an intellectual, affective, moral, and spiritual way. So for Catholic men, I would say if you can identify if there's anybody in your area with that formation, that would be the first thing I would do.
Is there? I assume that IFP has a website.
IPF, Institute for Priestly Formation.
Do they have a website where you can find priests that have been through that? Okay, so
don't.
you really just need to word of mouth.
Directly for priests and seminarians formation.
Okay.
They don't do anything with mediating or brokering connections with the priests.
Gotcha.
So that would be your own chancery, your own diocese.
Okay.
Where can they find out more about you?
MattSimmons.org
okay.
is my website.
Okay, and you're based in Lincoln?
Yep, right I do work in Lincoln. Most of the people I direct are not in Lincoln. Actually, I do a lot of stuff over the phone or Zoom, that kind of thing. FaceTime, generally, not Zoom. I don't have Zoom. So if you use Zoom, you'll have to set up the appointment. But yeah, a lot of distance stuff.
Okay.
That's probably my favorite thing. And I give a lot of retreats, 8-day retreats, 4-day retreats. And I can do other abbreviated retreats as well at Our Lady of Good Counsel in Waverly, Nebraska. So.
Okay. But if we want a good tattoo, don't call you.
Nope.
Nope, not the
Not
guy.
anymore.
Okay. All right.
What parent recommendation? I think what are you, Carhartt? Carhartt guy?
What?
Are you a Carhartt guy? What's your...
No. I go to Target.
Okay. Fair enough.
I wear $7 sandals from Target.
I know what I'm getting you for Christmas this year. It's the same pair of jeans.
All right.
Maybe in a different color.
Well, we have one fun thing we like to do with our guests, Matt, and so we've got, this is the Barn Again podcast. Barn Again. And so we've got some eggs, fresh eggs, and we're going to ask you to pick, I don't know if you can see those or not, but there's some eggs in there. We're asking you to pick one. You'll find a number at the bottom, and you want to look up the number.
They're real eggs. What number do you got?
6.
Number 6. All right, the question is, Matt, and you don't have a whole lot of hair on the top of your head, but if you had to choose between a mullet and a perm, which would you choose and why?
A mullet, because there's no upkeep. Little upkeep.
Business in the front, party in the back, right?
Okay, so follow-up question. Did you ever have a mullet?
I did.
What?
Amen.
Oh my gosh.
Mid-80s.
Okay.
Mullet. The first haircut I actually asked for and chose myself was a mullet. And I had to I tried going to barbers and they couldn't do it. And I ended up having to get it from a hairstylist in Omaha at Westroads Mall.
Like zigzags on the side
I was
or
gonna say,
anything?
like the old,
Nothing?
none of that.
No, just old school?
Yeah, old school mullet.
Did you have a mustache at the time? Was that part of
too
the
young.
gig?
But you were,
I was only like 10.
you were a skater, right?
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
skater kid.
So, you still skate?
I did a couple years ago, but then at that daddy-daughter day, I shattered my shoulder playing sharks and minnows, and so I've kind of been banned from skateboards and activities like that.
It's better that
Starting
way.
to break.
Yeah.
Well, we can continue to pray for your ministry and all the great work you're doing. And
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Matt. We appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
All right. We'll see you next time.
on the barn again.